Hello, and welcome to another edition of Worth Knowing. I am Dan Costa, the editor-in-chief of Techonomy and Worth Magazine. And this is an opportunity for me to talk to some of the innovators in tech, policy, and business who are changing the way we live, work, and play today. Our guest today is Eugene Kirpichov. He's the co-founder and executive director of Work on Climate. Kirpichov was a software engineer at Google, but he exited the tech industry to work on climate full-time. Work on Climate is an organization that's dedicated to building the workforce we need to manage our energy transition. Eugene, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dan. I'm really glad to have an opportunity to talk about this.
So I think the place I want to start is with your personal journey. So obviously, being a software developer at Google is a pretty good job. But you left the tech industry to work on climate full time. How did you get to that place?
Yeah, it was indeed a pretty good job. Can't complain. But basically, over the last few years of my software career, I had been gradually accumulating a level of climate concern that just reached a level where it made no sense to continue working on anything but climate. And I could afford to leave, so I left and took another coworker from Google AI with me, with the sole purpose to find what we're going to do in climate. And we had no idea what it might possibly be, or whether there even really is a lot of things for us to do. But turned out that there are a lot of things to do for for us and people like us. And it turned out that there is a huge untapped problem of getting more people to work on this.
So let's talk about that. In terms of there's lots of different ways to go about ameliorating the climate problem, but you're focused literally on building the workforce to help scale up these solutions. Talk to me a little bit about how you see the problem.
Yeah, so the way I see the problem is essentially building a climate positive economy. It's not a separate industry. There is no such thing as big industry and then climate industry. Instead, it is about rebuilding every industry we have. It's about converting our whole, multi-trillion-dollar energy industry to clean energy, converting our multi-trillion-dollar vehicle industry to clean vehicles, converting our buildings to being more energy efficient, converting our food systems to rely less on, high emission intense animal meat, and so on. So this is a massive, massive economic transition. It affects everything we have built. And it requires a transition in the workforce of similar scale, because the people who are going to be pulling off this transition, it's not climate scientists and policymakers. No, they're needed. They are catalyzing the transition. But in the end, for example, people who are going to be decarbonizing our food system, it's not climate scientists, it's food system executives. And the people who are going to be decarbonizing vehicles, again, it's not climate scientists, it's electrical and mechanical engineers.
Why we talked about this a little bit, like why is the market forces at play here not sufficient to sort of supply meets demand, and companies need to hire these employees? Why is it not happening?
Yeah, the reason it's not happening is that we just don't have enough people with the necessary skills. And the market will solve this eventually. It just will solve this when it's far too late. A good example is the software industry, which over 40 years of its existence, it has gotten us to 25 million people. While in case of decarbonizing the entire economy, we need more like 250 million people. And we need them in 10 years rather than in 40 years. So the market is not good enough for this. We need to go much faster than the market can possibly go. And we need to get the entire power of the education and workforce development ecosystem that has created today's workforce. That same system needs to change and adapt to the needs of the future economy.
What are these skills that are in demand? I mean, as you explained, it's like we are looking at is an engineer is an engineer. So what are the special skills or the unique skills that are now required?
Yeah, there are quite a few, and it's true that there are some roles where the skills transfer is. For example, many companies need software engineers. Well, so do climate companies. Many companies need accountants. Well, so do climate companies. There's a good amount of people like that. However, for example, companies need to do carbon accounting. That's a new skill that most accountants don't have, and we're not even close to having enough people for even today's demand for people with those skills. For example, circular economy experts, without whom many companies cannot rebuild their business models. For example, battery chemists, electrolyzer engineers, nuclear engineers, process engineers, So there's a lot of people where the amount of people we have is nowhere near enough. There are also areas where we do have people, but they don't know that they could work in climate. They don't know that it's a possibility, or they frankly don't care, which is also a very valid reason. And then there are industries that where perhaps today the talent shortages are very small. For example, as I understand it, the direct air capture industry needs like a grand total of a few hundred people right now. But without these people, it's never going to get to the point where it needs a few 100,000 people and where it can, sequester gigatons of carbon.
How are the educational systems preparing people this next wave of workers? You're starting to see these things show up in curriculums?
Very slowly, yes. We're starting to see schools this year announcing plans that they're going to think about it. So it's starting to happen very slowly. For example, recently, a group of business schools have announced that they will begin working on gradually upgrading their curriculums. I should note that when talking to people who have spent the past decades trying to upgrade their curriculums, it takes decades to upgrade them. So we're going to need to go a little bit faster than this normally goes. There are a variety of schools that have started specialized programs focused on climate, but I personally think this is the wrong approach. I know, with all respect to what the Stanford Doerr School is doing or Harvard Salata Institute are doing, that's great, but it's like at the advent of computers appearing, it's like starting a computer school. It's the wrong way to go about it. The right way to go about it is to make sure that everybody everywhere knows how to use computers.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy, and that this is not a separate category. And it's we've done some research, and it shows that the younger generation wants to work in climate and they want to make a difference. But I think that's misunderstanding, as if there was just a climate job. All jobs are going to have a sustainability focus. So it will work its way into every industry, and therefore should work its way into every curriculum.
Yep, that's very accurate. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the role of work on climate. How are you helping the market move faster?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll speak a little bit about our history and how we arrived at the understanding that we need to do something at the systems level and how we're going to go about it. Work on climate was created when I made my goodbye post on LinkedIn after leaving Google, and it blew up. And 500,000 people saw it. Several hundred of them were reaching out and saying, "Hey, Eugene, I'm in the same boat. I don't know where to start, but I want to work on climate. Please help me." We started work on climate initially almost as a hobby project. We started an online community to help professionals who are looking for climate work find it. And that went pretty well. And several thousand people have actually found jobs with the help of the community we built, attributing it to its help. And then I looked around and realized that the full problem has 4 or 5 more zeros at the end of it. And it's not the kind of problem where you can even honestly make a dent with a community or a job board or a single climate school or anything like that. It's just a whole different type of problem. Then it became clear that we need to be working on getting the entire education and workforce ecosystem on our side. And that's what we're working on now. So we are currently working towards creating a couple of initiatives on that front. One of them is creating a new industry body that we're going to call the Climate Workforce Coalition. And its purpose is going to be to help all those organizations in the education and workforce ecosystem navigate this change together. We have some other things in the works as well, and our community is going to continue playing a critical part in this, but it's not going to be the whole thing. Not even close.
And have you worked, how closely are you working with like government institutions? And now that the IRA has passed, there's all this funding for green projects. You'd think that would have a great stimulative effect, but are you working closely with government to make these changes?
Yeah, the IRA did have a great stimulative effect, but something that most people don't know is that the IRA actually doesn't include any funding for workforce development. For example, if you are hiring, it will give you more tax credits if you're hiring for a good job. But there is nothing in the IRA where you can come and say, "Hey, I'm here to develop the workforce," and they will say, "Here's some money." There is no funding for that.
Companies may want to hire for those roles, but there may not just be enough employees to fill them.
That's right, yes. And when it comes to how we're working with this, so we are actually doing our first major initiative around it this year. So we are starting a pilot industry working group focused specifically on one of the areas on advanced STEM roles in climate hard tech solutions. And we are bringing all those stakeholders. We're bringing government agencies, we're bringing national labs, we're bringing climate accelerators, as well as major school system authorities, professional associations, and coalitions of professional associations, and so on. So for the first time, we're bringing these two worlds together, the climate world and the workforce world, and saying, figure it out. And we're going to facilitate that conversation and facilitate a year-long working group where they will actually begin doing something. And then we will see what kind of projects emerge from that and what support they needed, and then use that to design this industry body that's going to be, the best way to describe it is an ecosystem accelerator.
Yeah, and I think that the conversation about workforce also helps cross sort of a generational barrier. We talked about how young people tend to be more climate sensitive than older generations. But I think those older generations, in order to reach them, if you explain to them that their business is going to need these types of employees going forward, I think it frames it in a different way. It's not just doing good for the planet; it's also doing good for their organizations. Have you seen that gap between the generations?
Yeah, there's certainly a gap between the generations, and it plays against us in some of these issues. For example, a lot of climate solutions, in order to commercialize them at scale, you need people who have been building factories for 40 years, and nothing less than that will do. And a lot of those people are, not as on board with the with the idea of decarbonizing the economy. So you need to find them, you need to incentivize them. So it's a problem. While it's true that young people overwhelmingly want to work on this, and equally overwhelmingly don't know that they can and don't have the resources to gain the skills to do that. So there's definitely a gap.
So how can business leaders, suppose a CEO and a board really wants to get in front of this, what kind of processes can they put in place? How do they adjust to this new climate, if I can use the word?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, and this is, outside of my expertise, they need to get serious about decarbonizing themselves. That is not, I don't know the best way to convince people to do that. Some of them are serious about it, some are not. But if they are serious, the next barrier is going to be that they don't have anybody on staff who knows how to actually hit the goals that they set. And I'm not making this up. There are companies with 80,000 employees that have literally 2 people on staff who know anything about how to hit net zero goals, and they know how to do it the 80s way, not the 2020s way, which is a bit problematic. So they need to acknowledge that, and they need to, I think, start training programs, and they need to start those training programs in collaboration with other educational institutions and other professional communities and associations. So they need to acknowledge that the people they need simply don't exist, and they won't appear unless they help them appear.
Yeah, I think it's a great point too. When we talked about carbon accounting being part of the accounting department, there are emission requirements in Europe. They're starting, there are companies that have signed on to reduce their emissions, and yet the processes for tracking emissions and understanding how to account for them is a skill set that's pretty rare in most accounting departments. And that's but it's obviously very necessary. Have you done any work specifically in terms of helping accountants make that transition?
We haven't, no, not yet. That's going to be the focus of our second industry working group. The first one is focused on advanced STEM. The second one is going to be focused on essentially corporate sustainability roles, and carbon accounting is going to be part of that. And to be clear, we're not necessarily going to be training carbon accountants ourselves, because there's no way that Work on Climate can train anywhere near enough of them that we need. But we can catalyze the collaboration between those with the power to do that. And I guess another interesting thing about all this and catalyzing this ecosystem action is that this is a very different situation, in my opinion, from climate policy. Here, nobody is particularly incentivized to stay entrenched in their ways. For example, schools actually want to appeal to students who want to learn these skills. Employers who did set net zero goals actually want to hit them. And a lot of people actually do want to work on this. And economic development agencies actually want the clean tech revolution to happen, in their country. In the case of the US, they want it to happen in the US rather than somewhere else. States actually want these new economic benefits to come to them. I mean, it's like the tech industry, but much bigger.
We've got a question from the audience. I'll just read it out. It's from an anonymous attendee. It's a senior level generalist tech team manager with a product management background.
Mhm.
In their job, they found there are almost no roles for senior level people who want to transition to work on climate. What's your advice for people who want to work in the space but are hitting a wall? And I think that's almost a transition that you made at a senior level. Is there a dearth of senior level jobs in the market, do you think?
There is a dearth of senior level jobs in the market. I think that's fair, especially, I mean, there are a good amount of senior level jobs, but there are senior level jobs that require very different skills.
Yeah.
So there are some companies that do need people like very senior tech leaders in climate, but honestly, it's a very different industry. Like, for example, imagine if accounting was just coming onto the landscape, and they were needing CFOs, and we didn't have any CFOs. There's not a lot of people whose skills are directly transferable to being a CFO. So I wish I had a very good answer. I don't have a very good answer. I mean, there are some people whose skills are not in demand in climate, and we need to kind of accept that. At the same time, try to gain the new skills. They might not be quite a senior level, but generally, as a senior level leader, I can give you a few hypotheses as to where your skills may be needed. So, well, first of all companies need senior level leaders. Right? It's not necessarily a software engineering leader that they need, though there are some that do need it too. I would advise to go directly to their founders and talk to them and convince them that you're a good leader, and say like, hey, I know I don't have process management skills, I can't run a factory, but I can manage a team, and see if maybe they have a role for you. When it comes to specifically product management, to be honest, there are a lot more product managers who want to work in climate than there are roles for product managers. You might be one of those that do get a role, and the roles that exist are probably mostly at climate tech companies, specifically software companies. So look in that direction. I guess one more pointer I would give is don't look just at climate startups. So there are big tech companies that are doing something about climate quite seriously. For example, Salesforce has net zero cloud. Microsoft and Google have massive amounts of climate efforts. They may have shut down some of them, hopefully not all, during the layoffs, but just pointing out that it's worth looking in that direction too. And these are unfortunately jobs you will never find on climate job boards. Right? Those tend to be overwhelmingly just jobs at startups.
Let's flip it and say for the wave of young people that are just graduating, how can they prepare themselves and find level jobs and get started?
Yeah, I would say look at so when it comes to people who have already chosen a track at school, I would say look what is the low carbon future of the track that you have chosen. If you're working on vehicles, your future is probably electric vehicles. And just dive deeply into what is going to be needed to build that. In case of vehicles, it's going to be more battery technology, it's going to be a lot more electric engineering, and find a way to learn those skills. And it's entirely possible that you won't find a good way to learn them. If you do, lucky you. If you don't, it might be harder. It might be that the only way to learn those skills is to hang out with people who have those skills and learn from them, or find internships and so on. So I'm taking I think a slightly more pessimistic tone today than in many other conversations, because today I am not here to bring the message that everybody can find a job in climate. I think eventually that's true, but today that's not true. And the reason that's not true is because our education and workforce ecosystems are not ready. So today I'm bringing the message that we need to change those systems.
Very good. Is that if I was to ask one thing you think is worth knowing for our audience about the climate job market, what would it be?
I think it's that it is massive. It will need people in every role, but it will in many cases it will need extra skills, and you might need to learn them, and we need to build the systems that allow you to do that.
Very cool. So if people want to participate, they want to support work on climate, how can they get involved, and how can they support your organization?
Yeah, there are different answers for different people. Well, first of all, we're a nonprofit. You can donate to us, but there are probably more impactful ways than the donations we might expect from this type of call. So if you are a leader of an educational institution, for God's sake, put this on your agenda. Like, go to your board now and tell them, like, why are we still not there? If you're a leader of an economic development agency or something like that, do the same thing. If you're a leader of a large company, go to the schools in your company's network and start developing training programs with them. If you're a leader of a professional community, or if you're just an influencer among people like you in your role, stop hanging out in the climate bubble. Start bringing this new knowledge to your existing professional community. For example, say you're an AI specialist, you met a really cool climate AI company, you want to talk about it to everyone. Well, don't talk about it to your climate buddies, talk about it to your AI buddies, right? Yeah, that's my advice.
That's great. Cross-pollination is how we're gonna get through this.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, Eugene, thank you so much for talking to us today. Obviously, we're going to talk about a lot of these same topics at Economy Climate in New York on September 20th. Encourage anybody who wants to get involved to learn more about this to attend that conference. Thanks so much. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dan. This is great.
Right. That'll be worth knowing for today. Thanks for joining us.